The sound of boots slamming against the polished floor echoed through the barracks. But it wasn't the rhythm of discipline. It was a beat of mockery. Private Carter stood at attention, sweat trickling down his neck, trying to keep his shoulders square. The barracks were quiet, too quiet, until a voice shattered it. "Private Carter, you call that standing at attention?" Drill Sergeant Thompson's voice rang out, sharp as a whip. "You're about as straight as a question mark." The laughter that followed cut through the silence, cruel and loud. Carter's face burned, but he didn't flinch. He wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. What could he do? The other recruits stared at him, some smirking, others outright laughing. It was his first week, but already Carter knew what they thought of him. Weak, out of place, a failure waiting to happen. Just another guy who didn't belong. "Look at him," Sergeant Thompson continued, walking down the line, his boots clicking against the floor with each step. "This is what happens when you think you can just waltz in here without earning it. You think you'll make it through? You're gonna be in the back of every formation. You'll never be a soldier." It wasn't the first time Carter had been humiliated, but somehow this felt different. The sting of the words hit deeper than they should have. Maybe it was the way Thompson's eyes never left him, as if Carter's failure was the only thing worth seeing. Maybe it was the feeling that something inside him was breaking, piece by piece. Across the room, Private Ramirez stood, silent as always. Her eyes briefly flickered toward Carter, a flicker of something. Sympathy? Regret? But then she turned away, pretending to inspect her boots, her jaw set, as if saying something might make it worse. What good was silent support? Carter didn't need pity. He needed to be seen. After the drill, while the others left to eat, Carter lingered in the back. He didn't mind the quiet, the loneliness. It felt like all he'd ever known. But this was different. The weight of judgment was heavier than anything he'd carried before. His boots felt too tight, his uniform too stiff. The walls of the barracks seemed to close in on him. "What's wrong, Carter? You can't even handle basic drills?" Thompson barked from the doorway, leaning against the frame like a predator watching prey. Carter didn't answer. He couldn't. What could he say? That his whole life had been a struggle to prove he was worth something? That he'd spent years trying to prove to everyone, including himself, that he wasn't just another statistic? He took a breath, squared his shoulders, and silently went to the chow hall. No one spoke to him. The food tasted like sawdust. The days bled together, each one a repeat of the last. Drill after drill, day after day. The barracks felt colder, the pressure building with each passing moment. Carter pushed himself harder, run faster, lift more. But it never felt enough, never strong enough, never fast enough. Not for Thompson, not for anyone. And then one night after lights out, Carter sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at the ceiling. The sound of the barracks settling was the only noise. The other recruits were asleep, but Carter was wide awake. He felt every bruise, every scrape from the day's training. But he also felt something else, a fire. It was buried deep, smothered by the weight of expectations and humiliation, but it was there. It was small, barely a flicker, but it was there. Maybe I'll never be the best, he thought to himself, but I'll be damn sure they know my name. The next morning, the drill was more grueling than ever. The rain hammered down like bullets, turning the training field into a swamp. Sergeant Thompson barked orders from the front, his face a mask of frustration. "Private Carter," Thompson shouted, "why are you dragging your feet? You want to quit? That it?" Carter didn't say anything. He just kept moving, one foot in front of the other, through the mud, through the cold, through the pain. His boots squelched with every step, but he didn't stop. Not this time. There was a small change, a shift. The other recruits, the ones who had laughed at him before, now kept their distance. They didn't mock him, at least not out loud, but the air between them was thick with judgment. Carter didn't care. He kept going. And Ramirez, she noticed. She always noticed. She didn't say anything, but Carter saw the way her eyes lingered on him during the rain drill. The slightest nod of approval when he finished a lap, even though Thompson had pushed them all harder than any of them thought they could go. He was doing this for himself now, for his own dignity. But the biggest challenge still lay ahead. He had no idea what would happen, but Carter knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end of it. What's next, he wondered. What happens when they see I'm not the failure they think I am? The question hung in the air like the last drop of rain before the storm breaks. And Carter? He was ready to face it. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters of this journey. The days passed like a slow march. Carter felt the weight of every minute, every second dragging behind him. The air was thick with expectation, and the constant strain of trying to prove himself gnawed at his insides. But somehow, he kept going. Every drill, every punishment, every late-night session trying to catch up, it all felt like one long test he wasn't sure he'd ever pass. One evening, after a grueling PT session in the rain, Carter dragged his exhausted body into the barracks. His legs burned, his shoulders screamed for relief, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Not after everything they'd said, after everything they'd expected him to fail at. Not after the sneers and the quiet whispers behind his back. The barracks were eerily quiet, most of the recruits already in their bunks, trying to sleep. Carter sat on the edge of his bed, looking down at his hands, soaked and raw from the day's work. He didn't need to see the others. He could feel their eyes on him. They were still judging him. That wasn't going to change overnight. "Private Carter," a voice broke the silence. It was Sergeant Miller, the man who had been relentless from day one. The mocking tone in his voice was impossible to miss. "I thought you were going to be something special. Guess I was wrong." Carter didn't look up. He didn't need to hear it again. Miller snorted and turned to walk away but stopped halfway across the room. "You know, Carter, if you weren't so damn pathetic, maybe we wouldn't all have to suffer through watching your failures." The other recruits barely held back their laughter. Carter felt the familiar heat rise in his chest, but he forced himself to breathe. It was better to keep quiet. That's what they wanted, right? A reaction. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Private Ramirez was in the corner, sitting on her bed, flipping through a notebook. She had always been distant, always keeping to herself, but Carter had noticed the way her eyes lingered on him sometimes. He wasn't sure what it meant. Was it pity? Sympathy? Either way, it didn't matter. She hadn't stood up for him when they tore him down. She never did. Carter let out a shaky breath. It was just another day. Just another drill to get through. It felt like that was all his life was now. Just getting through. The next morning, they lined up for another round of PT. Carter was exhausted, and every muscle in his body screamed for mercy, but he wouldn't let it stop him. Not this time. Sergeant Thompson was in a particularly foul mood. He seemed to take extra pleasure in targeting Carter that day. Every command, every extra lap, every push-up felt like it was meant for Carter and no one else. "Come on, Carter, faster! You want to quit? You look like you're about to quit. Is that what you want?" Thompson's voice sliced through the air like a knife. Carter gritted his teeth and pushed himself harder, but the words stung. He wasn't going to quit. No matter what anyone thought of him, he wasn't going to quit. He couldn't. But the doubt still crept in. What if he wasn't enough? What if he was just a failure in the making? What if all of this was pointless? After PT, Carter went straight to the chow hall. His stomach was a mess of knots, but he was too tired to care. He grabbed a tray and slumped into an empty seat, avoiding the eyes of the others. They were all too busy gossiping about the latest drill to even notice him. The tension in the air was palpable. Carter could feel it even if no one said a word. The others were still treating him like he was the weakest link. "Private Carter," came a voice. It was Private Johnson, a recruit who had made it his personal mission to make Carter's life harder. "What's the matter? You still trying to keep up? You know you'll never make it, right?" Carter's heart pounded in his chest. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. He couldn't even look him in the eye. He just nodded and shoved the spoon into his mouth, trying to ignore the bitterness that threatened to spill over. Then out of the corner of his eye, Carter saw Ramirez. She was sitting at the far end of the table, her eyes locked on him. She hadn't said anything, but there was a look in her eyes, something like regret. Or maybe it was guilt. Carter shook his head. It didn't matter. Not anymore. The days continued to blur together, each one a repeat of the last. Carter kept pushing, kept fighting against the exhaustion, the isolation, and the ridicule. But something inside him was shifting. It was during a night drill, just a few days later, that everything changed. They had to do a night navigation test, find their way through a course, using only the compass and their map. The problem was, Carter had never been good with navigation, not in the least, and he was sure that everyone knew it. He wasn't the only one struggling. In fact, most of the recruits were having a hard time. But when Sergeant Miller saw Carter fumble with the map, he couldn't hold back his laughter. "Look at this, everyone. Carter can't even read a map. This is the guy you think is going to make it?" Miller scoffed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Carter felt the weight of their eyes on him. It was as if the entire world had come crashing down. He was the failure. He was the weak link. But then something inside him snapped. Without thinking, he grabbed the map out of Miller's hand and shoved it into his own pack. He began moving, slowly at first, stumbling, unsure. But then something clicked. He focused on the compass, recalibrating his sense of direction with each step. His mind raced as he processed everything, every detail, every marker, every piece of terrain. And then it happened. He reached the checkpoint, the first recruit to do so. He wasn't supposed to be first. He wasn't supposed to be anything but the last. But here he was, standing at the checkpoint, looking back at the stunned faces of the others. Ramirez was there too, her eyes wide with disbelief. She didn't say a word, but her look was enough. Carter stood tall, chest heaving, sweat soaking his uniform. He had done it. He had proven them wrong. Sergeant Miller stared at him in shock, his mouth open, trying to find the words to tear him down. But he couldn't. For the first time, Carter felt what it was like to be respected, not just for surviving, but for thriving. The drill wasn't over, but Carter didn't care. He had won, and that somehow was enough. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters of this journey. It was supposed to be just another drill, another day of proving himself, of enduring the constant pressure, of fighting to survive. But something was different today. Carter could feel it in the pit of his stomach. Maybe it was the way the other recruits were eyeing him, like they were just waiting for him to slip up. Or maybe it was the way Sergeant Thompson was looking at him, a little too closely, as if he knew something was coming. The drill was simple enough. The squad would navigate through a dense forest area, carrying all their gear, setting up a mock perimeter and returning without getting lost. Easy for the others. Easy for anyone who wasn't Carter. But Carter had learned a lot since that night navigation test. He had learned to keep his mind sharp, to push through the exhaustion. He wasn't the same kid who had fumbled with a map just a few weeks ago. Now he could navigate through the trees like a soldier who had been trained for years. Still, he kept that to himself. He wasn't about to give them another chance to laugh. "All right, listen up," Sergeant Thompson barked. "We're moving out in 15. I want everyone to stay in formation, stay sharp. Don't let me catch anyone slacking. That means you, Carter." The others glanced at him, and he could feel the weight of their gazes. He didn't flinch. Not this time. He was done being the joke. He wasn't going to fall apart again. Not today. The group began moving out, and as they entered the woods, Carter's mind clicked into gear. Every step he took was calculated, precise. He kept his bearings, watching the trees, the terrain, the markers. He was in control. At least he thought he was. Half an hour into the drill, the unexpected happened. "Private Carter," Thompson called from behind him. Carter's heart skipped. He kept walking, but Thompson's voice rang out again, louder this time. "Private Carter, where do you think you're going?" Carter's breath hitched. He hadn't done anything wrong. He was just following the course. But something felt off. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He turned, trying to keep his composure. "Just following the route, Sergeant." Thompson's smile was like a predator spotting prey. "You call that following the route? You're lost, Carter. I can see it in your eyes. You have no idea where you're going, do you?" Carter's stomach churned. There it was again. The doubt, the ridicule. Thompson was baiting him, trying to get him to crack. But Carter couldn't afford to crack. He had come too far. He couldn't let it happen now. "No, Sergeant," Carter said, forcing the words out. "I'm not lost." Thompson's face twisted into a sneer. "You know, Carter, I don't know why I even bother with you. You're not cut out for this. Just turn around and go back to the starting point. This is too much for you." The others were watching. Carter could feel their eyes on him, waiting for him to fold. They were waiting for him to fail, but he wouldn't. He couldn't. "Sir, I'll finish the course," Carter said, his voice steadier than he felt. He turned and started walking again, trying to drown out the sounds of Thompson's voice behind him. But then it hit him. The one thing Carter had feared the most. The part of the drill no one had warned him about. The one thing that could derail everything. The equipment failure. Carter's radio crackled and popped. His earpiece buzzed with static. He reached up to adjust it, but the signal was gone. The rest of the squad was too far ahead to hear him. He was alone in the woods with no backup, no way to communicate with the rest of the team. It wasn't supposed to happen. Not to him. Not after all he'd been through. But the fear was there, lurking. It crept up his spine like a chill, threatening to consume him. The last thing he needed was to look weak again, to let Thompson see that he wasn't capable, that he couldn't handle it. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. His hands were shaking, but he couldn't show it. He knew he had to fix it. He had to solve the problem, or the rest of the squad would lose confidence in him. Carter knew exactly what that would mean. He'd become the laughingstock once again. He double-checked his gear, adjusting his compass and map, trying to find his bearings. But nothing was right. The trees looked unfamiliar. The ground felt uneven beneath his boots. The path he was supposed to follow had disappeared into the underbrush. Then out of nowhere, Private Ramirez appeared in front of him, her figure cutting through the fog of his panic. "Private Carter," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You're not lost." Her words were like a lifeline, cutting through the fog of doubt. She stood there steady while Carter's mind raced. He started, but his voice caught in his throat. "You've got this," she continued, stepping closer. "I've been watching you. You know what to do. You've been leading this whole time. Now trust yourself." For the first time in what felt like forever, Carter exhaled. He didn't have to prove anything to anyone. He just had to trust his instincts. He took another deep breath, centered himself, and began to retrace his steps. He wasn't going to let this break him. Not again. But just as he thought he had a grip on the situation, everything shifted. The radio crackled again, and this time it wasn't static. It was a voice, Sergeant Thompson's voice. "Carter, where the hell are you?" Thompson snapped. "You're wasting time. You're holding the squad back. You failed." That was it. That was the moment. Carter had had enough. The fear, the doubt, the ridicule. It all came rushing back in one unbearable wave. But this time, something inside him snapped. He wasn't going to let Thompson win. He wasn't going to let anyone dictate his worth. Without thinking, Carter grabbed the radio, and for the first time since this nightmare had started, he spoke with absolute authority. "Sergeant Thompson," he said, his voice clear, steady, and stronger than he had ever felt. "I'm not lost. I'm on the right path. And if you think I'm going to quit now, you're wrong." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Thompson was silent, and for a moment the entire forest seemed to hold its breath. And then came the silence that spoke louder than any words. Thompson's voice crackled through again, but this time it was softer. "Just get back here, Carter." It wasn't a command anymore. It was an order that had been stripped of its power. Carter had turned the tables. The moment Thompson had tried to break him, Carter had stood tall. He hadn't faltered. He hadn't given in. As he made his way back to the squad, Carter's mind was clear. The doubt was gone. He had proven to himself, to Ramirez, and to everyone watching that he could handle whatever came his way. The rest of the squad didn't say anything, but Carter could feel their eyes on him. This time they weren't judging him. They were respecting him, and that was all that mattered. When he finally returned, Captain Hayes was waiting. Hayes, who had watched it all unfold from a distance, nodded as Carter approached. "Well done, Carter," he said. You didn't give up, and that's what matters most. For the first time in what felt like forever, Carter smiled. He had won. Not because of the drill, not because of the path he had followed, but because he had refused to let anyone define him. And that was something nobody could take away. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters of this journey. The tension in the barracks was thick as Carter sat on his bunk, looking around at the others. He could feel their eyes on him. The squad had been quiet for days after the drill incident. He had proven himself, yes, but at what cost? Every look, every whisper felt like a weight on his shoulders. They respected him now, but that respect was tempered by something else. A deep, uncomfortable silence that had settled between him and the rest of the unit. It wasn't just the others who were quiet, though. Sergeant Miller had been avoiding him ever since the night of the drill. At first, Carter thought it was just the usual disdain, the kind of passive-aggressive treatment he had gotten used to. But now there was something else in Miller's eyes when he looked at him. Something that felt more like calculation than simple contempt. Carter tried to shake it off, but the unease gnawed at him. The next day during morning formation, Miller called him out. "Private Carter," Miller said, his voice as harsh as ever, but with a twist of something new in it, something that sounded almost like pity. "I see you've decided to stop embarrassing yourself. Good for you, but you're still not cut out for this." Carter braced himself for the usual barrage of insults, but they didn't come. Instead, Miller's gaze flickered to the rest of the squad, and Carter felt every eye on him again. Only this time, there was no support. "Everyone else is doing their part. You can't hold up the team any longer, Carter." Miller's voice dropped to a low, menacing tone. "It's time for you to go." The words hit Carter like a punch in the gut. He'd worked so hard, fought so damn hard to get to this point, and now this. They were going to kick him out. He could see it in Miller's eyes. This wasn't a drill. This was personal. "What the hell do you mean?" Carter asked, his voice barely above a whisper, but filled with the anger he hadn't let out in months. Miller stepped forward, his boots heavy on the floor. "You heard me. I've talked to the captain. You're not ready for this. You're holding us all back." Carter's heart pounded in his chest. He had never felt so exposed. The humiliations, the doubts, the long days of trying to prove himself, all of it came crashing down in that moment. But he couldn't back down. Not now. Not when he had come so far. "I'm not leaving," Carter said, the words coming out stronger than he felt. Miller leaned in, his face inches from Carter's. "You don't get a choice." His voice was low and dangerous. "You'll be out of here by the end of the week. Pack your bags." The room went silent. Carter felt the weight of every recruit's gaze on him. Some of them looked away, others stayed frozen, waiting to see what would happen. Ramirez was there too, standing off to the side. She had been quiet for so long, and Carter didn't know what to expect from her now. "Won't go," Carter repeated, his voice shaking but determined. "I've earned my place here." Miller smirked, shaking his head. "Earned? You think you've earned anything? You're nothing but a charity case, Carter. You're not built for this, and you never will be." The words stung, but Carter pushed the pain down. He couldn't let Miller see it. He couldn't let anyone see how badly it hurt to be told that, after everything, he was still just a failure in their eyes. Just then, Captain Hayes walked in, his boots ringing sharply against the floor. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Carter's chest tightened. He had been expecting this moment to come, but it still hit him like a ton of bricks. Hayes had been watching the tension unfold, and now it seemed he had come to make his decision. "Sergeant Miller," Captain Hayes said, his tone calm but authoritative. "I need a word with you." Miller didn't move. "Sir, I've made it clear to Private Carter that—" "I heard everything," Hayes interrupted. "Now I think it's time we cleared this up." There was a long pause. Carter stood there, his fists clenched by his sides, waiting for the verdict. Hayes turned his attention to the rest of the squad, his gaze sweeping over them like a seasoned officer assessing his troops. Then he focused back on Carter. "Private Carter," Hayes began, his voice steady, "you've earned the respect of your fellow recruits through your actions. You've shown resilience where others would have quit. And that's what we value here." Carter's heart skipped a beat. Was this real? Was Hayes actually going to stand up for him? Miller's face twisted with frustration, his fists clenching at his sides. Sir, with all due respect, this man, this recruit, isn't ready. He's a liability. He can't keep up. That's not your call to make, Sergeant, Hayes replied sharply. If I decide a soldier stays, they stay, and I've made my decision. The tension in the room was suffocating. Carter could feel his pulse pounding in his temples, his breath shallow. This was it, the moment that would either break him or change everything. Miller opened his mouth to argue, but Hayes silenced him with a single, cold glance. The decision has been made, he repeated. Private Carter will remain in this unit, effective immediately. The silence that followed was deafening. Carter's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't just the relief that washed over him. It was the shock, the disbelief. After everything, after all. The insults, the humiliations, the doubt. He had done it. He had proven that he was stronger than they thought. Miller stood there, seething, his jaw clenched tight. You'll regret this, sir, he muttered under his breath. Get out of my sight, Sergeant, Hayes ordered, his voice low and final. Miller didn't say another word. He turned sharply and stormed out of the room, leaving the squad in stunned silence. Carter exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment finally sinking in. The power had shifted. For the first time, he wasn't the one being pushed around. He wasn't the one being told he wasn't enough. He was the one who had fought and won. As the rest of the squad gathered their things, heading out of the room, Private Ramirez stepped forward. She didn't say anything, but she didn't have to. Her look said it all. She had seen it. She had witnessed Carter's rise, and for the first time, he didn't feel like the outcast. He didn't feel alone. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters of this journey. The morning sun broke through the barracks windows, casting a soft light over the room. Carter stood at attention, his boots perfectly aligned with the floor tiles. The weight of the past few days had settled into his bones, but for the first time in a long while, he felt something different. Peace. The fire that had burned so fiercely inside him. The anger, the hurt. It was still there, but it was no longer the driving force. What drove him now was something quieter, steadier. His place in this unit wasn't earned through words or promises. It was earned through every drop of sweat, every bruise, every moment of doubt he had overcome. Sergeant Miller was nowhere to be seen. The last time Carter had seen him was right after the confrontation with Captain Hayes. Miller had walked out, and nothing had been said since. Carter had expected more. Maybe more ridicule. Maybe more attempts to undermine him. But there was nothing. The silence was almost unbearable. As Carter walked into the chow hall, his mind wandered to the past. He remembered his first days here. Awkward, humiliated, constantly under the thumb of every drill instructor, every fellow recruit. He remembered the looks, the whispers, the feeling of not belonging. But now he was different. He grabbed a tray and sat at an empty table, his usual spot. The others were already talking, some laughing, some talking about the upcoming drills. For once, no one looked at him with pity or scorn. They looked at him like they looked at everyone else, as just another part of the unit. Then out of nowhere, Private Ramirez approached, carrying her tray. She didn't sit right away. She paused, looked at Carter for a moment, and then sat down beside him. You did good, she said, her voice quiet but sincere. Carter didn't know what to say. It wasn't just the words. It was the way she said it, like she actually meant it, like she had seen something in him that no one else had. Thanks, was all he could manage. She nodded, taking a bite of her food. The silence that followed was comfortable, not awkward. She didn't need to say more. They both knew the truth. Carter had proven himself not just to the unit, but to himself. He was no longer the weak link. He was one of them. Captain Hayes walked in a few moments later, his presence immediately commanding attention. He didn't say anything at first, just stood at the front of the room, scanning the faces of his recruits. When his eyes landed on Carter, there was no judgment, no hidden contempt, just respect. Private Carter, Hayes called, his voice carrying over the hum of chatter. I want to see you in my office after breakfast. Now get a move on." Carter's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't like he didn't expect it, but he couldn't help the nervous jolt in his stomach. What now? What was Hayes going to say? He knew it wouldn't be anything bad. After all, he had been nothing but a model soldier these past few weeks. But that feeling of uncertainty, of waiting for the other shoe to drop, still lingered. Breakfast passed quickly. Carter couldn't eat much. The nerves had him on edge. As he made his way to Hayes's office, every step felt heavier, like he was walking toward his future and everything that came with it. Hayes was sitting behind his desk when Carter entered, a stack of papers in front of him. He motioned for Carter to sit. "Private Carter," Hayes began, his tone firm but not unkind. "You've made quite the impression on this unit, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't have my doubts about you at first." Carter's stomach twisted. Here it came. The "you've done well" speech, followed by some kind of formal acknowledgement or maybe even a transfer out of the unit. But then Hayes leaned forward, meeting Carter's eyes with a seriousness Carter hadn't expected. "I was wrong about you," Hayes said simply. "I misjudged you. I should have seen your potential from the beginning." Carter blinked, taken aback. "Sir?" Hayes nodded. "You've proven more than you're worth. You've earned your place here, and I'm promoting you to team leader." Carter couldn't believe it. Team leader. His mind raced as the words sank in. It was the role he had been fighting for since day one, the role he had dreamed of but never thought he could actually have. The words felt surreal. "You've earned the respect of your fellow soldiers, and more importantly, you've earned my respect," Hayes continued. "Take it, lead your team, prove that you can do even more." The weight of the words hit Carter like a tidal wave. For the first time in his life, someone had seen him, not as the weak link, not as the charity case, but as a leader. His hands trembled slightly as he straightened up, his chest swelling with pride. "Yes, sir. I won't let you down." Hayes smiled, a small but genuine smile. "I know you won't." As Carter left Hayes's office, a sense of calm settled over him. This was his moment, his opportunity, and he wasn't going to let anyone take it away from him. He had earned this. When he returned to the barracks, the squad was already gathered for the daily briefing. As he entered, all eyes turned to him, but this time, there was no mockery, no silent judgment. There was respect. And in that respect, Carter found his place. He wasn't the same recruit who had walked in a few months ago. He wasn't the same person who had fought just to survive. He was a soldier now, a leader, and he had earned it. For the first time in a long while, Carter smiled to himself. This was just the beginning. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters of this journey. The final formation of the day stood beneath the American flag, its stars and stripes rippling in the wind, a symbol of all that Carter had fought for. The squad lined up, their faces serious, but a subtle shift in the air told the story. Sergeant Miller, once the source of so much pain, stood at attention and gave Carter a small, respectful nod. A simple gesture, but one that spoke volumes. Carter held his head high, eyes steady, feeling the weight of everything he had overcome. He was no longer the outcast. He was no longer the failure. He had earned his place in the respect of those around him. As the formation broke, the squad began to disperse, but Carter didn't move. He stood there looking up at the flag, letting the moment settle in. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about knowing that he had fought for his dignity, that he had reclaimed his honor in the face of injustice. That, in the end, was what mattered most. The lesson is simple, but powerful. No matter how many times you get knocked down, no matter how many people doubt you, you don't give up. You don't let their words define who you are. You keep pushing, keep fighting, and eventually you'll stand tall. You'll earn your place, not by the validation of others, but by your own strength and resilience. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And sometimes the hardest battles are the ones you fight within yourself, the ones that test your will to rise again after every fall. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to fight through doubt, prejudice, or injustice? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched you, give us a like to show your support. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Stories that remind us all of the strength we carry inside. Take care, stay strong, and remember we're all in this together. And